Take the Leap is the podcast where we get real about the roller coaster that is entrepreneurship and life. Sure, some folks make running a business look like a walk in the park, but let's be honest, it's more like a wild ride through a theme park with a lot of unexpected twists and turns.
Join us, your co-hosts, Ashlan
and Tory,
as we spill the beans on our own real-life experiences and shine a spotlight on some amazing guests. From the highs of success stories to the lows of epic failures. And hey, we'll even throw in some cringe-worthy, laugh-out-loud, embarrassing moments for good measure.
So buckle up and tune in every Tuesday and Thursday for a dose of raw, unfiltered truth about what it's really like to chase your dreams and build a business.
Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just dipping your toes into the startup world, we've got something for everyone. Even if it's just to make you think, wow, I'm glad I didn't do what they did.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Take the Leap podcast. We are so excited to have Amani Austin as a guest with us today. Amani is the founder of Austin Advocates With, LLC, a Black and women-owned equitable evaluation consulting business. She has over 10 years of research and data experience and 15 years of youth development and nonprofit experience. Amani specializes in engaging with research and evaluation for and with communities of color using a strengths-based approach that provides ongoing opportunity for feedback to cultivate trust and progress in a measurable format for accountability. In her lifetime, she has been a program participant, program director, education researcher, program evaluator/consultant, and board member, giving her a nuanced perspective on many of the intersections of navigating space and influence as a woman of color. Amani relies on her community cultural wealth, as described by TJ Yosso, to blend her educational and technical expertise with her passion for engaging, learning from, and supporting communities of color throughout her career. She is from the Bay Area, California, but has been living in Portland for the past decade. So welcome, and thank you so much, Amani, for being on with us today.
Welcome. We're so excited to have you.
Awesome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome.
It's always funny to hear your bio read.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I know you've done so much, but what we really wanted to kick off with is ask, what is your Take the Leap story? How did you decide to start your business and start this journey into entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So I think like a lot of people, it was during the pandemic, just kind of had this epiphany moment, So in short, I quit my nonprofit job. I was working a nonprofit job, and in that role, I was doing both evaluation and kind of nonprofit program development. I was functioning as both of those roles, and I just really was burnt out. And so I was going to start looking for a job, and I knew I wanted to do evaluation more. So most of my experience has been research and kind of youth development and nonprofit development. And so evaluation was kind of a newer sector for me, and I've been doing it for maybe 3 years more formally. And I was already doing consulting on the side. And so I was like, I'm too burnt out to look for a job and try to figure out what I want to do next. Like, I just don't have the space. And so I was like, I'll do some consulting work for the in-between to give me some time to kind of like get out of the role that I'm in and also take some time to think about meaningfully what is the next role that I want to do. So as this was happening, there was an organization that I really loved. They had asked me to be a board member, but some of the things that they were asking me for, it was like, I don't have capacity. That sounds like a big lift. Those sound like services. And this person, the CEO, knew that I was planning to transition out of my role. And he was like, what if I gave you a 6-month contract to like work with us and do some things? And it was just perfect. It was like 6 months. I was going to be getting paid more than what I was making, only doing 20 hours a week, rather than 40. And it was kind of this like, cool, I'll do this 6-month contract. It'll give me some time to thaw out. hopefully by the 6 months, I will figure out what's the role I want to do next. And I just like never went back. Once I had started that contract, I ended up getting 2 other contracts in the process. And I was just like, I like this consulting world. This just feels good. It feels right. I think I was also, workplace culture. It's like an organization can be cool in the work that they do, but workplace culture, I think, is just a harder thing to get right. And I was nervous. I was just like, I don't know that I want to be in a space and have to wait to figure it out. And so I think the thing about consulting is you get to work with a lot of different organizations and kind of witness what are people doing that works well and maybe what doesn't work. And so I was like, this will just be my research. I'm kind of like getting a vibe for different spaces. And now it's been about 2.5 years that I've had my LLC, and best
congratulations. That's so exciting. I love hearing stories of, especially so many people during COVID. I feel like either because they had to or they wanted to make that change. They kind of realized, I don't want to do this anymore, or, I want to reprioritize things. And so I feel like so many people started their own thing in COVID, and now they can't imagine doing anything else. So that's really exciting. I love that. And I also relate as a contractor. I love being able to work with companies, but not work in the companies. I love having the space. I kind of learn from them. I don't have to get involved in the office politics that go on, especially with nonprofits and stuff like that. So, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, there's a difference. Yeah, there's definitely a difference of being an employee versus a consultant. And I think for me, as someone who, part of the epiphany during the pandemic for me was that I needed to work on practicing healthier boundaries, right? Like just in relationships, in work, and all of these things of like, my space belongs to me, and I give myself permission, other people don't. And I think that the consulting role kind of challenges you, right, to be able to have to determine what your boundaries are, because you're not an employee. And so it's also just been a really good practice for me in that as well. So
that's so helpful. Yeah. I know I remember before I did consulting, working with other companies, I was constantly, you can contact me whenever, or, answering text messages late at night. And now there's just something about that contractor role. You're like, nope, I don't work after hours.
Absolutely not. Right. Yeah. I've gotten real clear, I've gotten real clear about when I'm available, right? The ways I would like to be communicated with. Like I've gotten real clear about those things.
So important too. It's so important. Well, that's wonderful. Well, what kind of, now that you've been doing this for a couple years, what's some advice that you would give yourself that when you were starting out, now that you know what you know?
Yeah. Well, I saw this question ahead of time, and so I was like thinking about it. And for me, honestly, I have no regrets. Like all of the things, I needed to have all of the experiences that I have had thus far as a consultant in order to learn, right? I think one of the ways that it makes me a better consultant, right, is navigating through different things. I felt like every time I got a new contract, I was able to like use what I learned from other contracts, right, to kind of like refine and strengthen how I approach and navigate things. So I really have no regrets in even like the challenging things. There was one contract where, and luckily it was a collaborative one, we had to end the contract in the sense of like as consultants saying to the client, like, this doesn't work. And I don't think I knew how I would handle that if I needed to do that. And so it was great to be kind of in a collaborative space where I needed that lesson. I needed to see what that looks like, what that feels like, what's the difficulty in that. So I'm a learner, so I feel really grateful about those things. But I think if I had some advice, so 3 things. So the first piece was trust myself instead of trying to prove myself. So I felt like, when you read my bio, it sounds like, okay, I've really been in the field. I've been doing stuff. But I think when I get into spaces, I'm kind of like, they don't know me. They don't know what I can contribute. I need to make sure that I like show them that I actually, and I think I started with a lot of this energy of like, I want them to be able to trust me with their things. And so I felt like this, I have to prove myself. And I think it just was extra anxiety. I think instead learning to like trust myself. I know the things that I know, and I don't know the other things, and it's okay to be truthful about that. And so I just think I would have saved myself. I would have got a little more rest. And then the other one is that I've been learning and like honing in more is advocating and standing up for myself and for my business. So I think there's this idea that like, you know, satisfy the client, whatever the client wants. And it's like, I'm very like principled. I'm very mission driven. I have a lot of values that like drive how I show up in space, how I do work. And there are some spaces when you are working with an organization or a project or a client where things don't align with your values, or you know, right, what's important to you or how you approach certain things. And that may not always be what the client is expecting, and that it's very much okay to name like what's important for you, what doesn't work for you, to create pause. And I think in the beginning I was a little timid of that because I'm like, they're an organization, they've been around for a long time. Like, who am I to like push back? But it's like, this is not just you. This is your business. This is your brand. This is how you are reflecting and representing what you do. And the next clients that you have, the next people that hear about your work, this is part of that reputation. And so, yeah, I think being able to like lean into that and find the confidence to like speak up for myself. Because I think I'm really good at speaking up for others. You know, like that's where I'm like, oh, I got this. Like when it's time for me, I'm like, oh, I'll be fine. I'll adapt. I'll figure it out. And learning like that's not, we can't do that here. We can't do that. So that would be advice. But I think I'm leaning into it. And then the last piece is embracing collaboration with other consultants. While I love being a consultant, I miss being part of a team. I miss thought leadership, just kind of being able to spit things off of one another and build. Mm-hmm. And so being able to collaborate with other consultants on projects and on different things is a really great outlet for that, right? And so earlier in my business, I had done a contract with another consultant that also did evaluation. And they had done evaluation longer, but I've been doing, I guess, DEI longer. I've just been living in it, working in it, community engagement. So there was kind of this like this trade that we would learn from each other and collaborating. And so far we've done like 4 contracts together. And it's just been so helpful because you get to learn from someone else's business, how they run their business, like how they're doing things. You don't feel like you have to be responsible for everything, right? Because there's someone else that you're in partnership with. And I think for me, it helps me think about what delineates how I show up in this work versus maybe someone else. It helps me figure out like, what are my values, right? Like where am I okay with meshing with others, and where am I like, this is different for me? And so I think that collaborating with other consultants is really good. But in the beginning, I was scared because I was just like, well, what if imposter syndrome, what if I'm not good enough? What if I don't like contribute and they feel like they're dragging me along and all this stuff? And it's just like, girl, get in there. This is how you figure it out together. So I think that collaboration piece is the thing I'm trying to lean into more.
I love that so much.
I love everything that you just said. There's so many great sound bites in there. I mean, that's part of the reason Tori and I do this together. It is lonely when you are a solo business person, and it's real. And the imposter syndrome, or I reflected with somebody the other day. I'm like, holy shit, we've been doing this for 3 years. Like, we haven't had to go back to, working a full-time job. We haven't had to go back to doing the things that, we had to do before. Like, we all know that, you can always lean back on that. But somebody did challenge me and they're like, why do you think that way? Don't hold yourself back. Just be like ridiculously confident that this is just going to keep going. And even like my coach told me, she's just like, you need to do the big dream vision again, like what it is, and look back at what you've gotten and all of that. And I was like, oh man, it is, because it is a scary thing, because that's the new leap, right? We took the leap into entrepreneurship. There's that next step thing that is the scary unknown that we can do. But thanks so much for sharing that. And the whole thing about like trust and
that was so powerful
is just
I know it was
you know.
advice for your younger self.
Yeah.
But
It's a difference in posture.
yeah, I feel like you were speaking directly to me. Because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs probably feel that way. But yeah, it was just like, oh yeah, definitely. I wish I had figured that out sooner. And honestly, I'm still figuring that piece out. Like that's not like setting boundaries and believing in
Right.
myself. Even though I'm better at it now, I'm not perfect at it. I still have days where I'm like, why did I just let my client do that? Or why did I just set myself up that way? Like, why?
Right. Yeah, and that's what I think. I take it as a learning. It's like, all right, that project took a little bit more energy. This is what I think I'd do differently if I had another project similar to that. Or, hey, this one worked really smoothly. So for me, it's like I'm taking notes. I'm trying to learn from each experience that I have, So it's good.
That reflection is so important too. I think that, dear listener, if you're listening to this, take those notes, remember the times, because everything is a lesson that you can pull into
it's a
the next.
takeaway. What's the takeaway from this,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you shared a little bit in your Take the Leap story about your why, about being burned out, but is there anything else you want to share about what your why for doing this work is?
Yeah, this is such a hard question because it's just like world peace, right? Like it's just like everything, all the things. But the like kind of tagline for my business, so my business is called Austin Advocates With, and my last name is Austin. And the reason why I chose that name is because my family is full of servant-hearted folks, right? Like my dad works in the community. My mom does hospitality. She's like volunteer of the year, YMCA, multiple years. Like I just come from a community and a family that really just believes in justice and showing up for people. And so that's where that comes from me, is really, it's a legacy of my family. And I told my dad, so I'm the oldest and of all girls. So, well, there's only 3 of us, but I'm the oldest. And so there's no boys. And I told my dad, I was like, oh, like when I get married, I'm not going to have like the Austin last name anymore. And he was just kind of like, it's okay. And I was like, I'm going to name my business this so that this legacy gets to continue. And so that's like part of why. So it's Austin Advocates With, because I believe that we advocate with community, not for community, right? So there's this very like savior complex that gets dangerous, right? Where it's like, oh, we need to help those people out there because they're not capable of helping themselves. And it's just not true. It's not liberative. And so for me, it's more of this posture. So I use evaluation in the sense of we're listening to people. We're asking people questions about their experience, about what they need, about what's important to them, because they know what's important to them, right? And then being able to uplift those voices, right? And so I do the little evaluation thing where I'm synthesizing, I'm creating themes out of what we hear, I'm looking at trends, but all I'm doing is uplifting voices from folks that are speaking for themselves, right? This is not a savior thing. And so I think of that as a lot of my why, right? Is being able to advocate with community and help organizations to start to posture that way. Because there's a lot of like, we'll do this for you, or let us help you, or we've saved you. And it's just not liberative. And liberation is really, I think, what we deserve, like what's important, what is life-giving. And so my tagline is cultivating spaces that can sustain transformative work. I think that when we talk about justice, when we talk about equity, it really is this color that we've never seen before, like as a society, as a collective, to be functioning and living in that way. We just haven't seen it. And so I believe that we actually need to reimagine what our systems can look like. And so this idea of, can organizations have a system, a culture, processes that are adaptive enough for transformative work, right? So it isn't this thing where it's always the same all the time. It's like we know that it changes. Depending on who's in the room, depending on what's happening in society, we need to be able to adjust to those things while making sure that we have processes that are inclusive, that are equitable. And so it's this thing that isn't static, right? It has movement. And so that's my why, is I want to like get into spaces and say, okay, cool. You want to do equity? What does that mean? What does that mean here? Who is that for? Right? Who's included in that? And if we were to dream that up and define what that looks like in the next 10 years or the 20 years, how would we build that? How would we build steps to that? How would we build values and principles around that? So that's my why, because I think we can reimagine it. I think that we can. And I think in order to get to any form of justice, we actually need a new set of principles and how we function. So that's my rant.
No, it's so great. I love that so much. It's such a good example of what could be, and the you know, I mean, I'm very much one of those people, like, burn it all down and do it again. Start
Yeah,
over
yeah.
again.
And
So
that.
it's just,
And
yeah.
that. Right.
Yeah. Because, we did,
Yeah, it's a both and.
it's a both and. Yeah. I mean, fixing what is wrong, and I like the width, because a lot of times you get into these situations where it does matter who you put in the room, who gets to make those decisions, whose voices you hear, who you talk to. And there are some cultures, like I've been in workplaces where, people who have kids, people who, have disabilities, like who gets to go out and do and then, in a world where a lot of stuff revolves around who wants to go out to happy hour, who wants to go out to drinks and things like that. And it does, leave certain folks out, or who is being tapped, to be in certain spaces. I know a job that I had left behind, they're like, oh, we were going to wait until you were done. I left that job for another job. They're like, we were waiting until you graduated from your grad program to like promote you because we thought it would be too much, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you made that decision without me. And so I found something better.
You didn't talk to
like,
me.
Don't make any decisions without the input. Like, it's wild.
Yeah.
So it's okay. They would have been shit out of luck anyway, because I would have started this. But all of those different things. So thank you for sharing that. That's so good.
Thank you.
Well, those are our standard questions. Now we're going to put you in the hot seat, which it's not really that hot or spicy, but so
it's maybe just warm. Is it like warm?
It's warm. It's warm. You should have fun with these.
Okay.
They're all usually pretty random.
I know Tori's our first. Could ask our first one.
And I usually ask the same one to start every time, because we've gotten some really great answers with this question. But it is, what is the best and or worst unsolicited advice you've received in your career?
The best. I don't know if it was like advice, but it was like an affirmation that I've been sitting with is, you belong to you. You give yourself permission. And I think I really needed to hear that, like, in my business and as a consultant, because I was a great employee, y'all. I do my work. I communicate things to leadership. I'll address things. Like, if there's a gap, like, I just do all the things. But I think a lot of times I'm asking for permission. Is it okay to do those things? Or what does that look like? Or what's important to this place? And I think for me, it's been such a gift that being an entrepreneur, as much as it is about the work that I'm doing and how that impacts communities and others, it also has been this very personal, like, healing journey of what does justice look like in my body? What does it look like to be embodied and still do this work? And so this idea that I belong to me rather than like an organization and now their values and I get to decide what that looks like. So I give myself permission to do things, like if I need to rest, if I need to take a nap, if I'm like, it's 3:00 and I've worked hard enough, it's time to lay down, right? Like, I get to decide that, but it also means that I need to step up if there are certain things that don't happen, or I didn't eat today, right? Because I've been too focused, and that's not that's not the ethic that I want to have around my work. And so I need to be gentle with myself and make sure that I have food. And so it's become this thing of like, how do I take care of myself in a way that is kind and good and honorable, both to me and my commitments. And I have it on my calendar like twice a week. It's like a random count. It just says, I give myself permission. Belong to me. And that includes like resting, moving my body, like drinking water. It's just a reminder to like disrupt the noise. So that is the best advice. I want to give the worst advice, but I'll pause.
I love that. I might steal that idea if you're okay with that, of putting that reminder. Yes.
You can have it.
That's such a good idea.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a reminder girl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I think the worst advice, I don't know that I have like a specific one right now, but it's more so just a lot of toxic positivity, just a lot of, and I think specifically when I was trying to consider leaving my job, right? I think being in the nonprofit world for so long, it's heart work, like HEART, right? And so even if you're burnt out, even if like you feel kind of exploited, or there's like some of these different things, you're like, but it's for the community, it's for justice. And so there's a lot of ways that you can kind of like ignore that you're not well at some point, right? And so I think there was several folks, right, that were just kind of like, you just need to push through, or they'll need you, and how do you, and so there was a lot of kind of like deterring, because this stuff is important. And I had to like understand, like, this isn't only happening within this job, right? Mm-hmm. I can still do justice work outside of this space and in this space. I'm not abandoning those communities or those people, but there was a lot of like toxic positive, like just push through, like what about the kids? And it's like, well, what about me? And I think for me as a consultant, so like I'm the first in my family to graduate from college, both in undergrad and master's, right? Like I come from, my parents, you know, had me young. They graduated high school and had me literally like 2 months later. And so I've made a lot of strides, you know, like for myself and for my community. But I think sometimes when you're working in justice community, it becomes this, it's for these people out there, and you're just this agent in this thing and it's like, wait, I'm part of this community. These people are me. Like, this is literally me. And so just as much as I'm advocating for their wellness and their care, mm-hmm. I need wellness and care. So particularly when I'm working with organizations, I'm looking at your staff of color, your trans and queer folks that are on staff. Are they being supported? Do they have the capacity of what they need? Is this a culture that they feel like they belong? Are they being listened to? And so it's been kind of this shift of not just the community out here, but what about the internal culture and how it's impacting the folks that are within it, because they also have a right to be well, right? So yeah, so that's just like been really important to me, is to kind of like push back on that, sacrifice yourself for the work. It's a both and, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can do the work of justice and make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. That's so important.
Totally.
Especially in nonprofits. And I think we all have worked in nonprofits before, and I think we all understand that burnout that comes with it, and the pushing through of, well, we're making a difference. We're really helping people. So it's okay that we feel this way, that we feel like we're dying every single day.
Right. And then you're making a difference with not a lot of money, right? Like also getting underpaid. It's like, at least the corporate people are getting paid and can have a living wage. It's like you're literally working hard, doing hard work, and not being appropriately compensated for the labor and the work that you're doing. It's like, that's not even, that's not right.
Absolutely not.
So, yeah. Consulting was a great space.
And Ashlan and I have talked about this before, on this podcast and just in person, but there's something about nonprofits we've noticed that as soon as you can be an employee and you could say, I want to make this change. I really think this idea is going to make a difference, yada, yada, yada. But there's a shift that happens when they bring in a consultant who will literally say the same exact thing, and they will pay for the consultant to make that happen, even if they have someone on staff pitching that idea to them.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's like, that's where you want to spend your money? Okay, right?
Yep.
But I think
Yep.
also for me, it's been really cool as an evaluator and a consultant is, if you bring me in, that's what I'm gonna say. Listen to your people. I'm actually gonna sit down and interview your staff and interview the communities and participants that you, and so it's not me coming in and telling you a thing. It's actually me listening to what are your folks saying and making some highlights, and then, doing some more strategic conversation of what does this mean for this organization? What are some changes? But that's all I'm doing, is bringing you back to listen to your people, right? Like, that's really the thing. So yes, that grinds my gears, because I was one of those people at my organization standing up, making suggestions, unpaid for this flavor. And
totally.
it doesn't hit the same, apparently.
I mean, it's that frustrating fact of like, if you ain't gonna listen to me, why the hell did you hire me? Like that's totally something I've had to do with clients and boundaries with clients now. Like, the minute you stop wanting to listen to me and my advice and my ideas, we can move on. I didn't get into this to hear.
And it's like, and that's okay. That's okay. If you feel like there's someone else that's a better fit, let's save us all the trouble, right? But I think this part of trusting people, right? Like, trusting people with what they know, and giving some space for that is really important. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I feel like this tees up perfectly to my next question, which is, your work in the space of racial equity, can be really challenging. You and I have talked about this before, about like organizations to be ready to do this work, because you don't want to be working with folks that you have to convince that this is important. So I would love to give you, this time and this space to represent, like, why should people be doing this work? Why is it kind of a non-negotiable? And, I think a lot of organizations get like scared of doing it or what it means. And I recently talked to somebody who, we talked about like, equity doesn't mean that some people's rights get taken away or things get taken away or things get removed for you. It's one of those, the rising tide lifts all boats kinds of things. So I'll shut up now and let you talk about what you see out there.
Well, I think first and foremost, I used to say equity is trending, and I think that there are a lot of organizations that have these, some of them are really beautiful, these equity statements about, because I think for me, equity it's saying we care about all people, but it's being more explicit in the folks who we have ignored, right? Or have not had access. It's explicitly naming those folks and saying, we need to do the work to show that we care about those folks, right? We recognize that these communities, that these spaces, when we've said this is for everyone, they have not been included in that. And we need to do some work to actually include them. That's what equity to me is. There's an activation of, we know we need to do something for this to happen. And so, I just feel like a lot of organizations have put out language around world peace, right? Essentially, right? Like, that they care about folks. But when you talk to them, or you talk to a staff member, you talk to the community of like, well, how have you seen that show up in this space? What does that look like? How does that connect to your work? They don't know. They can't describe it. They can't. And so I think in order to be able to mean what you say, and actually only say what you mean as an organization, we have to start to build some practices around what this looks like. And I think, honestly, I think that racism training is important, anti-racism training, because we need to know the history. We need to know the harm, the heaviness, that what we're talking about is systemic violence that has happened. I think that those pieces are really important as a foundation. And my hope is that organizations have at least done some of that work to learn some of those things. Because that's not my work. I don't explain racism to people. That's not what I do. There are other consultants that do that work, and I think it's a very kind of beginning foundation. But what I like to do is, all right, so you know that racism is harmful, and you're part of a society and a system where it's showing up, even when you do your best. is showing up because it's part of this system, but you don't know what it looks like to do this work. Let's get in here and start to imagine what this looks like. Let's dream up what this looks like. Let's talk about what it means to create a culture that feels good. And I think that people need help to imagine that. I think that we struggle to figure out, how do we build systems? How do we build spaces that actually can model this stuff and build practices around it? And so that's what I think is important, is that we take the time to unlearn the harmful practices and start to imagine and build new practices where folks aren't being othered, right? That we aren't assuming that everyone can go to the happy hour in the middle of the day, because we know who's included in our community. We know, right, what's important. And so, yeah, I think that we've got to practice it, right? The word stuff is cool, but it's not enough. And it's not going to make systemic change, for sure, right? Like a statement is not going to make systemic change. Building a practice is. And so and I think that there are organizations that are ready to do that, right? Like, I think they felt some of this stuff. They felt the consequences of saying the words, but not actually. And so they actually are ready to get in this space and kind of dream stuff up together.
That's incredible. And honestly, my next question kind of is almost a continuation of that. So in preparation for this interview, I stalked you just a little bit. I went to your website and I watched the video on your website, which I love. And you said something in there. You said, your goal is to make equity more tangible for companies, which I just love. And I guess my question for this, we could talk about a little bit more, is why do you think it's such a struggle for companies to understand equity and implement equity within their organizations? And I guess if you want to just talk a little bit about the process of how you make that tangible for them, how you get them there.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a sticky question. So one of the things that I use as like a framework. So in grad school research, I focus on education and racial justice. And so critical race theory was a lot of that, right? Because it's part of the education system. But really this concept that those that are most harmed by a system are most qualified to speak to it and to inform, right, its improvements, right? So the people that know what needs to change and what would work well within an organization are typically those that have been most othered or most marginalized by this system, right? And so I think when you benefit from something, right? When we talk about organizations that have access to power, we have access to money, specifically when we're talking about leadership, you don't feel the cost of that in the same way. You're like, our organization's working. We sell products. People like what we do. It's good. It's fine. It works well for me, right? But I think when we start to include more voices from people with different experiences, and this is the thing I do try to like kind of warn people is, okay, you want to be inclusive. That means you might get some constructive feedback about this environment. Some folks may say, hey, I'm neurodivergent and I need you to write that down. I cannot have you talking at me the whole time. That actually doesn't work for me at all. Like, it doesn't allow me to be an equal participant in this space. Can you make some shifts in the design of how you do these things to make sure that if you want my input, if you want me to be in collaborative space with you, this is what this looks like. And so I think it's hard because you get to be in this vacuum of all of these other people that decide we're going to do it this one way and this is the right way. And there really is no other way to do it besides this, right? And so equity actually says there's multiple ways of doing this. Right? And if you want a bunch of people in here, they're going to need different things. And you have to figure out, how do you make space? And that doesn't mean you need to address everything. That means you need to make space to hear what is needed and to anticipate some needs. If you know you're going to have parents, how can you plan for that? How can you, when you have an event, how can you be if you know that you're going to have some folks that English is not their first language, what are some things that you can do? If you know that you're bringing in people from communities that maybe have some reasonable mistrust with what does welcome look like? What does embrace look like? How do you foster relationship over time? So there's some of this stuff that we actually can start to do. And what's fun for me, and maybe, I don't know, not as fun for everyone else, is that we start to look at your policies within an organization, and we start to talk to people about how do these pan out. What social cues does this say to people that this is what's valued, this is what we're allowed to do here, and can we shift some of these? Like, if you want more people in the room, like, how do we? And so I think that's the tangible. Let's look at your actual policies. Let's look at the actual practices. Let's look at what training you're offering your staff, because you want them to now be inclusive and equitable, but where did they learn this? Right? Like, are you making an investment? So I think there are these very tangible spaces where we can start to do that work. And then it's going back to that reflection, right? That evaluation. How did that go? Did it work? What went well? Where do we maybe need to spend more attention over these next 6 months, right? What kind of constructive feedback do we get? So it's like, let's work this stuff. Let's not just give speeches. And so, yeah, I think that can be a little daunting for people because they don't realize how much work it really is.
Goes into it. Yeah. Yeah.
So once an organization has like kind of went through a leg of that, they feel more confident. They're like able to articulate like what this looks like. They're able to like give share quotes from other folks, right, in their community about, and so they start to be like, oh, okay, all right. Okay, so that's when I'm like, oh, okay, this is working. It's great. So
that's incredible. Yeah. I love that.
That's great. Yeah, status quo is always so much easier for people, but it is, it's like a muscle, right? Like the more you work on it, the more you do evaluation, the more you do equity work, and the recognition that it's iterative. It's not like we wrote a damn statement and we good.
Right. Right. No. Like it's a lifelong thing. And and I think people we need to not pretend that it's a fast thing. It's an ongoing thing, and you will have moments to celebrate. You need to celebrate those small wins. That gives you the energy to keep going. But this is a long sum game, right? It really is. And so I think when people are postured that and they understand, I don't even really posture myself as an expert. I say I'm a learner. Like I'm a lifelong learner. I'm constantly moving through things to learn, because I think that's a shift for organizations too. Instead of seeing themselves as experts, when it comes to equity, they're learners. They're learners.
Everybody should be putting themselves, because it might be different tomorrow. The world is different every day.
And that's okay, and that's good, and that's right. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Excited.
No, it's all good. I can see your clear passion for this work, and it's awesome that you're sharing this with us. So when we switch gears a little bit, I saw that you attended the Othering and Belonging Conference in Oakland recently. And, I know that this is probably maybe something that I did too often when I first started my business, is like going to these conferences and traveling and doing that. But can you talk a little bit about like, for folks who are going to take the leap into entrepreneurship, how do you feel conferences like this are important to, and how they impact your business, and kind of maybe some decisions you make in which ones to attend and which ones not to attend for yourself?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So again, because I posture myself as a learner, and I think that this whole equity, racial equity, DEI, it really is newer in the sense of a phenomenon that like we're studying organizationally and systemically. So we don't have a lot of research around best practices, right? People are practicing and doing these things in real time. So it's really important to stay abreast to conversations about what this looks like, how folks are trying these things out, what's working, what isn't working. So when I think about like trainings or things that I participate in, that's what I'm usually looking for. Is this a shared conversation about equity, right? Where people are practicing things. And the Othering and Belonging Institute in general is both research and practice. They're working with organizations all over California, but really all over internationally at this point, to practice some of this equity stuff. And that's what we actually need to witness is, I think, because a lot of people are like, okay, racism's bad. We get it, kind of. But no one knows what to do instead, right? And so I think to witness what folks are doing in real time helps me in my practice. It's a great networking space, right? There's some potential contracts there. There's some potential collaborators. Because for me, I'm not just looking for potential clients. I'm looking for other consultants and other people I want to collaborate with as well. So that's usually what I'm doing. And then for me, because I believe in a holistic approach. So my first year of consulting, I got my time back is what I kept saying. I was like, oh, I have my time back. Like, I don't have, I get to like decide what that looks like. I was like, what do I want to do at this time? And I'm a nerd, so I want to learn. So I took an embodied social justice certificate, which was really amazing. And it was really this concept of we can't do social justice work disembodied. And what does it look like to bring that to the work? And then I took Resma, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands, somatic abolitionism course, which again is how do we build communities and spaces where folks are embodied doing justice work. So I think that's another element for me that's worthwhile because I'm constantly thinking about how do we include the somatics, how do we include all of these things into equity work? Because really, between me and y'all and everyone else, a lot of this is dysregulation. Like when we have a conversation about including folks that are different than us and making changes in our environment and shifting our policies because someone else is not at the table because it's in the way, what we experience is dysregulation. We're like, oh my gosh, is this going to take away from me? Do I have to change that, right? And so there is this somatic part of like, all right, you're actually okay. You're feeling discomfort. Let's talk about this work. So I've really been engaging in learning in conferences that are incorporating some type of embodiment, and the Othering and Belonging Conference does that as well.
Awesome.
So, but yeah, I'm always taking a workshop or a facilitation practice or because it really is my nerddom. Like I'm really interested in this thing.
And I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs
Love
can relate to that, right? Like I feel like we all kind of went into this because we're passionate about the thing that it is that we're doing. And we want to be constantly learning. We want to be finding new ways to help our clients and help people around us, regardless of what that work is. So I think that's important too. And that's really awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, my question, you had mentioned earlier in the conversation that you think it's really important for the people in the workplace who have been othered to be able to talk about their experience in order to actually kind of make the shift because they're going to be the ones who understand it the most, right? And my question to you is, because I've been through, organizations that put on trainings and stuff like that too. And what would you do if those people didn't quite feel comfortable speaking up about their experiences? How would you encourage, what would you say to the leadership there who's like, well, nobody's really participating, or I don't think they feel comfortable sharing? How would you encourage them to create that environment, I guess, where they would feel safe to share their experiences and be truthful about what they went through?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. One of the things that we say, just like in justice spaces and work is just because something isn't expressed doesn't mean that it's not felt. So sometimes, particularly in organizations, no one made a complaint, so everyone's good here. And it's like, the silence actually might be telling you something more than you think. And so I think first it's to not assume that people will speak up, because that requires a ridiculous amount of advocacy, especially if you have been othered. So again, part of me building up for my consulting confidence was in an organization, me speaking up. I'm a Black woman, and it makes me hyper visible to have to now speak up about a complaint and do this thing. That's a lot of vulnerability. So I think that's one of the things that I like to talk to leadership about. And usually when I come into an organization, if I'm not having conversations with leadership, I don't want to be there, because it's not fair to have this conversation and not have decision makers actually talk about these things so that we can shift some policy, right? We don't want a feel good thing. We want change. So typically having that conversation with leadership, that's a lot of energy and labor for people to have to constantly speak up. What we want to do is invite people. We create a system of consistently asking people. We want feedback. How are things going? How does it feeling for folks? We're giving an opportunity, and not 5 minutes at the end of a meeting, but that we're actually creating space so that people can expect. They're going to ask me what I'm experiencing and what's coming up for me. The other thing is I personally as a consultant would have one-on-one conversations with folks first. And so rather than in a group setting, creating some space for folks to share what feels comfortable to them. And so usually I'm kind of bringing those themes. So instead of all your staff having to do that work, kind of organizing that. And then the other thing with leadership that I think is, Ashlan, when you were saying, like, what's a prerequisite for organizations or a thing that they have to be willing to work on to do equity work, particularly leadership, is being able to receive constructive feedback. Because if you want to know how someone feels and it isn't all positive, it isn't all, I love this place, this is so great, don't change anything, you have to be able to sit with constructive feedback about your organization and not necessarily personalize that, but receive it and say, okay, that's information. What can we do about that? What's realistic too, right? Because sometimes people like feel bad and then they, what's it called?
Overcompensate yeah.
So it's like actually being able to take constructive feedback because that's what honesty often is. If we want to make our spaces better, we're going to get some constructive feedback. And it doesn't mean it's a failure. It doesn't mean that the whole place is bad. It means we've got work to do, and that's okay. So that's usually, but I'm usually working with leadership on it. That's not like a just advice. You have to actually build a practice. Because the last thing I'll say is it's dangerous to use your discomfort with the feedback you get to make decisions, right, that actually get in the way of doing equity work. So now if I'm upset and I'm just a staff member, I'm just upset, right? But if you're upset and you're the CEO, right, or you're in this place where you get to shut you get to shut programs down, you get to not give access and resources. And so we've got to deal with that dysregulation because it's actually, you're making policies from that place. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, I was in a workplace where we had an equity audit done, and the CEO spoke to somebody in a group setting, and they were like, "Oh, she knows exactly who said what," because of the way she addressed somebody. And so, yeah, even having those sorts of things, like when leaders, are saying, "Oh, it's completely anonymous," but to your point, Tori, when it's a small team and people have to step up, it can be really hard and really scary. And I think sometimes leadership in these companies forget, with the hierarchies and things, like, some of these jobs are people's livelihoods. Like you said, being the Black woman has to stand up. I always felt that way, being a woman of color standing up. Now I'm going to be deemed the problem child.
Right.
I brought
now I'm angry.
Now I'm bringing that up. It's going to create barriers for my career, and even sharing certain things over time. When you have to think in your head, like, oh, is that decision based on, it has nothing to do with my work ethic, my productivity, my anything. Is it because I did something that now has barred me? Or, my big thing was, the hair color debacle of like people being like, well, she can't go do this shit now because she got fun colored hair. And I was like, excuse me, what if I just shave my damn head bald? This is ridiculous, but but there's all those, intricate little things. So yeah, well, I feel like I learned so much in this conversation about equity and evaluation work, and so much to bring forward into my own work. Is there anything, as we wrap up today, Amani, is there anything that you would like to plug or share, or where can people find you? out there?
Yeah, so you can find me on my LinkedIn. I'm doing more work of posting there. I think, the imposter syndrome just gets in the way, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know. But I'm like, it's okay to share the things that you're doing. So I'm working on that. And then I would really love for folks to subscribe to my newsletter and on my website. That's also a new thing, thanks to Ashland, supporting me with marketing stuff. That I'm doing a monthly newsletter, and so I'm sharing some of the things that I'm doing that month, a community feature, so either an organization or just someone in the community that's doing really great justice work. But I'm also sharing my wonderings. I'm really trying to think about this liberative approach. How do we make sure that we are getting free in the process of trying to do work that liberates? And so I'm just sharing my wonderings and my curiosities there, and I'll have a blog soon. So I would love if people tuned in, because it's great to just have more perspectives, taking those things in and sharing thoughts.
I love that. Thank you so much. This has been such an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you for listening to me.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. And until next time, we'll see you back here for the Take the Leap podcast.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Take the Leap podcast. We hope you found useful takeaways you can apply to your entrepreneurial journey. Subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and keep in touch and follow us on Instagram. If you have business questions, shoot us a direct message or leave us a comment. We'll try to cover it in an upcoming episode. And visit our website, taketheleap-today.com, for more resources like our online course that accompanies this podcast.